I'm James Rule. Welcome to the Lonely Leader podcast, where we help existing and aspiring leaders find clarity, build resilience, drive performance, and enhance fulfillment. Today, we're talking about another one of our leadership essentials, composure. Now, this series has become really popular, and it's my attempt to draw out some of what I believe were critical, essential parts of my leadership style during my 10 years as a chief executive, but equally importantly, drawing out those traits and highlighting those traits that I see in the highest performing leaders that I have the privilege to coach and mentor. And the reason why this has been encapsulated under leadership essentials is I believe through my own personal experiences and those people that I'm coaching that these really are essential traits for each and every one of us to employ and to deploy as a leader. So composure for me is very much about that ability to stay calm, to keep a cool head, to keep moving forward, irrespective of the external circumstances and the level of pressure that you are dealing with. It inspires a tremendous sense of calm and composure in your followers. And when you think about those leaders that you have worked with, that you have the highest levels of respect for, invariably, you'll recall them staying composed, even under the most extreme and challenging of circumstances. So today we're going to talk a little bit about why it's important. I want to share a couple of examples of leaders that I admire that really have epitomized composure. And as with every episode, I'll try and wrap things up with a series of takeaways and actionable points that you can employ yourself to hopefully raise the level of composure you bring in your professional role, but equally in those myriad of personal roles that you also employ as well, whether that's as a father or a mother, a partner, a sibling, etc. We all need to find composure in each and every facet of our personal and professional life. So why is composure so important to leadership and how your team performs? Well, I liken it to being the thermostat of an organization. When a leader is calm, composed, and in control, then that tends to ripple out into the wider team and influence them to mirror and adopt similar behavior. Conversely, and I experienced this during my time being a captain on the rugby field, you're there to lead your team, but you're only human. And occasionally in physical sports like rugby, you might lose your cool, lose your composure, and all of a sudden you start making some erratic tackles or, pushing against the fine margins of the rules of the game, and you start to be penalized by the referee. And the more you try and rectify that, the worse it can get. I think anybody who's played sport will be familiar with that analogy. They used to talk about the red mist coming down, the classic articulation of when you have lost composure and you start flying around trying to tackle everybody on the opposition. Well, what does that actually do? It creates this a level of panic, frustration, irritation in those around you. So that sporting analogy is very fresh in my mind, but it's equally apparent in the workplace. I alluded to earlier the fact that when you're calm and composed, you see those traits roll out in the wider team. When you lack that composure, you're erratic, you're panicking, your mood blows up and down, you have temper tantrums. Well, then lo and behold, you start to see that mirrored in the people around you, and it starts to become the behavior that you see in the wider organization. My start point whenever I'm working with leaders is composure is essential for two main reasons. One, you make better quality decisions. There are exceptions, but it is very, very rare that when you are emotionally angry, irritated, frustrated, that you will make the best possible decision, that you will optimize your performance. Invariably, that loss of control and composure means that we make erratic, inappropriate decisions that we later regret. So actually, for the good of you and your leadership impact, and for the good of the people that are impacted by those decisions, you want to be in a composed state. And secondly, you role model the behaviors that you want to see as a leader. And we've talked about this in a multitude of episodes Do you want to be in charge of a frantic team that lacks composure, or a calm and composed one who can move seamlessly through periods of pressure and adversity? It's a no contest. Of course, it's the latter. But you have got limited to no chance of embedding those behaviors in your wider team if you don't role model them first. So, for the good of your team, for the good of the culture, for the good of the status quo within your team, you need to control your own emotions and demonstrate the composure you wish to see in others. An author I admire, Ryan Holiday, has a quote that's particularly relevant to this. He says that strength is the ability to maintain a hold of oneself, to be in control of your passions rather than controlled by them. I think it frames what we're talking about perfectly. So let me share 3 leaders that I believe epitomize composure. And I'll start with Nelson Mandela. I'm sure that most of you know the story behind Nelson Mandela, but considering he'd spent 27 years in prison, when he finally came out and had a chance to step back into that political arena, it would have been easy for him to be consumed by his emotions, to be bitter, to be angry, to allow hate to dominate and drive decisions. And he did none of that. He retained his composure. He focused on reconciliation rather than revenge. And he just epitomized, whenever you saw him, a man who was calm, composed. He knew what he was trying to achieve, and he was moving through and past the obstacles in his way in order to do just that. I'm a big fan of history, and I particularly like to read about the leaders that have shaped the world, those historically impactful leaders. And John F. Kennedy, JFK, is one such example. And when you read around the Cuban Missile Crisis and the dangers that posed, and the posturing and the potential for escalations and violence and things to really get out of control, and he chose to remain calm, composed, and to find a solution without losing his control in a very tense and high pressurized situation. And that's another classic example of a leader retaining composure in the most difficult of circumstances. Thirdly, with my passion for sports, it seemed appropriate to pull out a sporting example, and I'm going to hold up Roger Federer, the tennis legend, as an example of somebody with unbelievable composure. Now, I've talked about how at times I would lose my control on the rugby field. I'm sure anybody who's played sport, from the amateur golfer to the hockey player, netball, rugby, football, cricket, soccer, you name it, I'm sure you can think of moments where you've got frustrated with yourself or with an opponent or perhaps one of the officials, and you instantly regret it, but it's just in that moment you were so frustrated. Well, I watched Roger Federer play tennis for many, many years on the biggest of stages. I don't think I ever recall him losing his composure. Plenty of famous tennis players, the likes of John McEnroe, etc., would be instantly recognizable when you think of people losing the composure and losing the cool. But in all the years that Roger Federer played, I don't think I saw it once. And it's probably no surprise that that ability to retain his composure allowed him to execute his skills at the highest of levels consistently in the most pressurized of environments, to, as a consequence, become one of the most successful and revered tennis players of all time. Now, as with all topic areas that I cover on the podcast, I'm a big believer that we can improve. We can develop a skill, we can develop a habit. All it takes is a focus, a commitment, and a dedication to deliver. Now, I'll share some tips. Some will resonate more than others, but I would like to guarantee that you won't be practicing each and every one of these tips. So look for something new. And for those things that you've possibly heard before, well, ask yourself, yeah, I've heard of these before, but am I constantly implementing them? Tip number 1, pause before reacting. I think we all know we can apply this to probably each and every facet of how we communicate, whether that is taking a deep breath and pausing before we respond in an open meeting or in a one-to-one situation. Perhaps it's on a telephone call, perhaps it's as we're drafting a response to a text or a WhatsApp, or perhaps it's an angry response to an email. Very few of us will be at our best when we immediately respond and react when our emotions have been triggered. And just being able to take that pause is critical. Step up, walk away from your desk, put your phone down, take a moment, look out the window, just reset and have a think about what will best serve me in this moment. And I think we all know that an angry, frustrated response very rarely leads to a de-escalation of a tension or an immediate solution to a problem. We know it, but the challenge is, can we find the discipline to practice this pause? Tip number 2, protect your well-being. We are not robots. We are human beings. There is only so much we can take in pressurized situations before we lose our composure. That thermostat analogy is appropriate again. The temperature is rising. What are you going to do to turn that thermostat down so you can regain that composure and make the best decisions in that given moment? And often what that needs is a focus on how we can refresh mentally and physically. It could be as simple as going for a walk. It could be going to the gym, doing a workout, taking the dog for a longer walk. But we need simple but consistently applied daily habits that help us clear stress from our minds and bodies. If we don't, it becomes increasingly difficult to retain our composure. You've heard me use a variety of analogies in previous podcasts about this, but the most appropriate is perhaps the elastic band. It can stretch, go back to its original state. Stretch, that's the pressure. You do some exercise, you take a walk, it goes back to its original state. Stretch, repeat. But if you just keep stretching and stretching and there's nothing done to reset your well-being, eventually that band will snap. You lose your composure. So challenge yourself, even something as simple as a quick walk around the office, take a couple of levels of the stairs and come back to your desk is far better than just allowing that thermostat to keep climbing and climbing and climbing. Tip number 3, reflect on past reactions. I've mentioned reflection a lot recently because I think it permeates so much of what we do. I think it's healthy to reflect on, how did I react to pressure? How did I react to adversity? And where did it take me? I reacted with aggression or frustration or abruptness, and the situation escalated. I caused offense. I lost the goodwill of my team. Whatever that situation may be, by reflecting on it, it makes it easier to find the discipline to go back to point number 1 and take a pause next time you find yourself in a similar situation. Conversely, there will be occasions where you can be proud of yourself and say, oof, I was so tempted to send a response to that email. I was so tempted to bite back at an inappropriate or disrespectful comment that I encountered. But actually, when I reflect, I'm pleased that I didn't, because it allowed me to regain my composure, find the right solution or the right response, which was delivered in a firm but respectful way without the emotion and the frustration taking hold of me that would have occurred had I responded immediately. So reflect on the bad, reflect on the good, and allow it to help you improve how you react in the future. The next tip is embrace emotional detachment. It ties in to the previous points. You've got to try and take the emotion out and apply logic to the situation. What needs to be done and how best can I get us to that point? Our emotions invariably distort everything. They cloud our judgment. It's far easier said than done, but trying to push the emotions to one side and apply logic. Go with your head rather than your heart. Your heart often drives the ego. You've taken offense. It's your emotions coming to the fore, but your head invariably knows what needs to happen and what is the right way to move forward in this given situation. Tip number 5, maintain perspective. I like to read a lot around Stoic philosophy, and something they were very good at was reminding themselves of their own mortality, that everybody's going to die. Now, that sounds morbid at first glance, but the reality is it had a positive connotation that, well, if we're all going to die, let's make the most of where we are. It's something I've talked about when it comes to trying to be more present, but I think it's also really powerful in maintaining perspective. We get an inflated notion of ourselves. That's not a criticism, but our ego gets involved of what our legacy is and what will this decision mean, etc., etc. And the offense we've taken is the most important thing that's happening in the world. And actually, does it really matter? Will this situation matter a year from now, 6 months from now, a month from now, even a week from now? Often the answer is no, it won't. And we all know that there are seriously upsetting and difficult things going on in the world every single day. And when one of those comes onto our radar, the only positive of that unfortunate insight is it puts our day back into perspective. But I think we need to become better at putting things in perspective without having to expose ourselves to the negativity and the horrors that someone else is experiencing. I think we have to be able to dial back and say, does this truly matter? It's that old notion of pick your battles. Do I really need to fight and get frustrated and push back on this particular point? Is it going to derail my performance, my strategy ultimately? Or should I just be sidestepping this and putting all my energy into those things that truly matter? Tip number 6, rehearse responses. Now, I'm a big advocate of visualization. It's something elite sports performers, elite military operators do regularly. They expect what's going to happen and they rehearse for it, they train for it, but then they spend a lot of time mentally preparing for it as well, seeing what might happen, how will they react, positive and negative situations. It helps to reduce the level of pressure they experience in the moment, and your brain can't really tell what is a real experience, a memory, or a projection and a visualization. I won't bore you with the science of it, but in the context of composure, one of the things that's most likely to make you lose your composure is being surprised, being blindsided by a situation or a comment. Therefore, tying back into my earlier point about reflection, it's also very powerful to actually spend some time anticipating where the challenges may come from, where the pushback may come from, where the criticisms may come from. Which individual team member or colleague do you think will be least likely to support this new proposal or this strategy that you're developing? And when you take the time to think through what those objections or pushbacks may be, you can prepare your response. Now, obviously, we hope it's not just a sea of negativity and resistance to everything that you propose, but anticipate where the most likely source is, be prepared for it. So much easier to draw upon that pre-rehearsed response in a moment of irritation, conflict, call it what you will. Much easier to draw upon it and maintain your composure than it is to think off the cuff when you are still in that emotionally volatile, reactive state. A little bit of prep work will always yield results in this regard. Tip number 7, seek feedback. Very, very difficult for most of us to do. But if you want to know whether you truly possess composure and demonstrate it on a regular basis, ask the people around you. How do you think I handle pressure? Would you say that I'm composed? Do I inspire you to be calm and composed? Or do I create panic, fear, anxiety through my words, actions, and demeanor? And you might not hear everything that you want on a positive, but actually the positive in the negative is somebody gives you that constructive feedback, you become more cognizant of it, you're aware of it, and therefore you can make some changes to improve the level of composure you display in the future. Tip number 8, control your environment. I've talked about your working environment in previous episodes. It permeates this as well. If you want to retain a composed, calm outlook, then ideally you want to be in an environment that facilitates that. So you know yourself, when your office is chaotic, when there's papers all over the place, you can't lay your hand on anything, it is creating stress, it is reducing your ability to retain your composure when new and continual updates of challenge and pressure comes to your door. Conversely, when you're ordered, organized, working in a clear, uncluttered environment, you're just that little bit more adept at being able to retain your composure. That's your physical environment, but also the people within your environment. Now, it's not easy to remove colleagues. I accept that, but there are ways and means to ensure that you find yourself working in and around positive, energy boosting rather than negative energy draining people. That might just be you have to take yourself to a different hot desking environment or a meeting room. You just need to step away from a certain place in the office. It may be you need to reposition your desk completely into a different part of the office. But if you are exposed to energy draining people or environments, well, you need to try and control what you can to change it for the better, because if you don't, you are reducing your ability to stay composed when the pressure comes. Tip number 9, lead with empathy. In my experience as a CEO and working with and leading a vast array of people, a diverse array of people over many years, you become very aware of the fact that when you see a dip in performance or perhaps a behavioral instance that seems out of character, there is normally a reason. There is normally a root cause that you can't see. Perhaps it's a health scare with a loved one. Perhaps it's a health scare with the individual. Perhaps it's a breakdown of a relationship from a marital point of view. Perhaps it's a challenge that one of their children's going through. But when you actually lead with empathy, when you stay aware of what's going on around you and take the time and effort to get to know your people and to be able to reach out and say, let's have a drink. Is everything okay? You invariably find that there is a cause. Now, that's not to say you tolerate any behavior because people have stresses in their personal life. Far from it. But it just makes you far more empathetic, makes it far easier for you to retain your composure, to then, because you're calm and collected, solicit the insight and the information from your colleague that you need and develop a plan together to fix it whilst making them aware that the behavior or the standards that they're delivering are not acceptable and need to improve. That is so much more successful than simply blowing your top, losing your composure because people are not performing or behaving in the way you want and expecting that to be the end of it. It isn't. You might make an immediate stop to that behavior or that poor performance, but it will resurface, sure as night follows day, down the track. Whereas when you can lead with empathy, get to the root cause, come up with a plan and shape it together, you are almost guaranteed to make long-lasting improvements in that particular regard. Tip number 10, focus on the bigger picture. Now, granted, this does have a little bit of repetition with maintain perspective, but I think it's a good way to wrap up these takeaways. Ultimately, you need clarity on what is most important to you as a leader. Something I spend a lot of time when I'm coaching and mentoring people is to really drill down into what is success. What are the key areas that we need to move forward for you to feel you've had a good year as a leader? What are the areas that we need to hold as our North Star and hang all our strategy in granular detail beneath? And it's looking at those sort of big picture objectives that's so important to determine, is this really worth me losing my composure over? Will this matter in a week, month, or year, as we said earlier? And if the answer is no, then you process it, you bypass it, you move forward, and you keep your eyes on the bigger picture and the most important decisions and use of your time as a leader to move you, your impact, the team, and the overall business forward. So the final question for me is, having listened to this episode, how composed are you as a leader? What score would you give yourself out of 10 for composure? If it's high, congratulations, keep doing what you're doing. If it's low, reflect on these tips and think, which of these can I implement? And as with all of these points that we discuss, there's no silver bullet. You don't have to click your fingers and expect everything to flip overnight. But when you take small, consistent steps, you will notice a difference. So I wish you the best of luck on your journey to finding higher levels of composure within your leadership role. Thanks for listening to the Lonely Leader podcast. I'd be very grateful if you could share and follow if the content resonates. And if you're looking for additional free resource to support your continued growth and development, then please do check out our social media and website details in the show notes. Remember, quality leadership on the outside must always start within.